There is a tale, it's a rather strange tale of an ass, of a sort of donkey, of a mule. It's known as Buridan's ass. It's called Buridan's ass because indeed he's a creature of Jean Buridan. That's my pronunciation of the French, Jean Buridan. And Jean Buridan was a 14th century logician and philosopher, and he dreamt up this tale about Buridan's ass, about this poor donkey. And the donkey, indeed, is pretty hungry. And the donkey finds himself, strangely, between two bundles of hay, two bales of hay. I believe that some people know about perspective drawing, so the bales do not look the same on the picture, but nonetheless they are the same size, the same degree of succulence, the same nutritional value, the same volume, and so on, and they are the same distance away from this poor ass. The ass is very, very hungry. He thinks, that's a very nice bundle of hay here. Perhaps I should eat of this. But I'm an ass of reason. Why should I eat of this one when there's this bundle of hay over here? That looks equally nice, so perhaps I'll eat of this one. But I need a reason to eat of this one, and I don't have a reason to eat of this one because I could eat of this one equally well. Some of you will start saying, he's just an ass. Why doesn't he, in fact, start eating of both of them? It's very disturbing for him. I thought it would be easier if I get the ass to do that rather than I myself to perform it. Still, the ass has this problem then. He's trying to reason. He thinks that before he does anything, he should have a good reason for doing it. Yes, he's hungry. He does have a reason to eat. But his problem is, do I have a reason to eat of the left bale rather than the right bale or the other way round? And so he keeps on looking from left to right and right to left and so on. And as you can imagine, death occurs. This strange gentleman who has suddenly appeared on the screen is Spinoza. You can tell he's lost his voice. He's speechless because he says, only an ass could be so asinine, could be so stupid as to be so hungry and yet have two bundles of hay, two bales of hay, and end up starving. And that is mainly the motive I have here, to try to remind us all that sometimes you can end up reasoning too much. And I think this is shown by way of the example of the great Buridan's ass. There's quite an important, deep philosophical problem about how you relate your reasons, your reasoning, to what goes on in your brain, in your neurological circuits, which somehow lead you to go off to eat of this chocolate bar or to drink of this gin or whatever is your fetish these days. And I assume none of you are actually into bundles of hay, but we should be open-minded about these things. As I said, though, Spinoza thought it was just stupid. You should just go and eat if you're feeling hungry. And this is a point which is really being made, that you need to know when to stop. That clearly is a key point of this story. I've given you this example with regard to Buridan's ass, when he doesn't know how to stop reasoning because the two bundles are exactly the same. But I have a similar problem when I see a variety of different consumer products. Sometimes I might be wanting a simple toothbrush, and yet I go into the pharmacy and I see red ones, blue ones, green ones, yellow ones, tall ones, thin ones, strong bristles, weak bristles, and so on, electric ones, straightforward manual ones, and so forth. However can I decide? And so I'm completely forlorn. I'm lost in front of them. It's totally beyond me about how to make a decision. So once again, in this case, because of too many choices, you may find you are unable to make a choice. And we could move on this idea of knowing when to stop, thinking in terms of our consumer society, because more and more things are made and we are encouraged to buy more and more things, more and more. Surely somewhere we must learn how to stop. We must learn how to stop thinking. We must learn how to stop reasoning. We must learn how to stop acquiring more and more items. Indeed, there's an ethical problem there, because you may become so overwhelmed with the idea of acquisition that you actually lose the idea of other values. So this is what I'm actually also making the point here, that there are dangers with the growth of consumerism. It really is important, I think, to recognize that there's more to life, there's more to being a human being than just acquiring more and more goods. I I suppose if you are ass, you might like to acquire more and more bundles of hay, but as we saw, that doesn't really help the ass because he ends up starving. Looking around here, though, I see no one looks as if they're starving. They're all eating away. But that's life. At least you are not yet onto the gin and tonics. But I'd like to expand this point about values to another area. And this is where you might see someone drowning. There is someone drowning. Help. And should you start wondering about, should I help that person drowning? Wouldn't that be reasoning a bit too far? Yes, of course, you might need to assess the situation, namely, for a start, are you a swimmer? If you're no swimmer at all, it would be crazy to jump in the river and start trying to help. But you could call somebody else to help. But if you started thinking, oh, is that person worth saving? Is he somebody who votes in the for the wrong political party? Is he somebody, or he or she for that matter, somebody who's going to become a brain surgeon or going to become a cost to the state? All these things will be relevant considerations, you may think, but surely they're not. You should just act and save that person from drowning if you are a swimmer. You ought not to be on the riverbank thinking, oh, will it make my bow tie wet? Will my pink jacket get destroyed? Is there somewhere where I can change? And so forth. That'll be crazy. So I'm encouraging here that with some ethical decisions, some moral decisions, it really is a matter of acting according to your humanity instead of thinking, oh, I really must have a reason for doing this. And we can see this in other ways as well, when we actually start realizing that you may have not two bundles of hay here, but two different people drowning. And the old-fashioned script shows that one of those persons drowning is your mother, and the other person is a nubile, young, very attractive lady. And you start wondering, who should I save? Should I save the one on the left, or the one on the right, or the one on the left? It's perfectly baffling. But hold on, wouldn't that be one thought too many, so to speak? Surely it's obviously the case you should save the nubile young lady. Oh no, sorry, you should save your mother. I often get that wrong. I must remember which way round it's meant to be. It's meant to remind us again, in the words of the famous philosopher who died about 10 years ago, Bernard Williams, that sometimes there can be one thought too many. In this case, we have to accept some partialities, some preferences for people actually are morally required. You would have to be incredibly cold and calculating, wouldn't you, to start thinking, well, I can only save one. Should it be my mother or should it be this young lady? You'll be very, very cold if you are a very crude utilitarian doing the reasoning of saying, well, which will bring more happiness into the universe, saving my mother or saving the young lady? Is the young lady going to become a brain surgeon or going to become a drain on the state and so forth? I would say in that sort of case, what's important is that indeed you have a certain partiality here. You instinctively save your mother, and then you'll try to save the other person if you could. In this story, you can only save one person at a time. The point here I'm trying to encourage then in our thinking is that some things which we do, going back to Buridan's ass, and also thinking about these problems to do with my problem of toothbrushes, but far more importantly to do with saving people in this example or telling the truth and so forth, often what's important is not to reason too much. Often what you need to do is to act, and act with a sense of fellow feeling. And so I think this is really what one is stressing, that sometimes the way to act is a matter of acting with fellow feeling, and that may well require you at times to act partially in favor of your mother, or your son, or your sister, or your brother, or your lover, or so forth, rather than thinking, oh, I should be totally impartial. Of course, if you are offering a business service, if you are, for example, a shopkeeper, then you should be impartial between the people wanting to buy from you. You ought not to be racist or speciesist, but it's okay, I think, to be familyist, as we may call it. It's fair enough within morality to act in favor of your family in many situations. It wouldn't be if you are actually advertising someone for a job, then that would just be sheer prejudice if you always gave it to your incompetent son or your incompetent father. But in the private realm, you need to have certain partialities. So that's another feature of trying to stress how there can be a mistake in reasoning too much. Another feature of that story, though, is that if you do think we must always have a reason for what we do, that often leads people into saying, well, whenever you do anything morally right, or morally wrong for that matter, you're always acting out of your own self-interest. There's a strange theory. It's often associated with certain neurophysicists and so on, saying that at the end of the day, you're always acting out of what you think of as being your own self-interest. I don't think there's any evidence of that. Often we do that, but I don't think it's true to say we always do. People often do act because they are genuinely concerned about the interests of someone else. I suspect that most of us here, if you were by the riverbank and you were able to swim, you would jump in and save the person and not think to yourself, well, I'm only doing that because I want to glorify myself, or I want to win the reward, or I want to be in the newspapers. You do it for the sake of somebody else, I hope. Well, that's what we aspire to. And here's an example coming up, I hope, in which we see dear Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is often described as the individual in the 17th century who thought everybody always acted out of self-interest. So someone saw him giving somebody a sixpence, a beggar in the street sixpence, and they asked Thomas Hobbes, why did you do that? And Hobbes say, well, I could see he was in great pain, and so that pain, in fact, led me to feel painful as well. And so by giving him the sixpence, I was able to ease my own pain. There, the impression is that he only gave the money to the man in the street who was hard up because it helped him, Thomas Hobbes, to feel better about himself. Well, many of us would say that's an immoral attitude. Surely the right thing to do there is you should be acting to help somebody else in their own interests. It's only because you start thinking there must be a reason for doing this that you may fall into the trap of saying, well, the reason must be self-interest. So doing the right thing, I'm encouraging us all to think, sometimes requires reasoning. As I said, with regard to the river, it would be crazy to jump into the river without reflecting that you are able to swim, but often you need to be acting on your instincts for a fellow feeling of concern for others, of love for others, and so forth. I'm trying to be, therefore, to be optimistic. I tend to be a bit pessimistic. I tend to think things get worse for people in general, but on this occasion, I'm encouraging us all to believe things can get better if we stop thinking we must always act with a reason, because that can lead us into thinking there's too much self-interest around when there doesn't actually have to be so much. Reasoning, of course, has its place. I mentioned you need to reason in order to be concerned about whether you should be jumping into the river or not. This bit of talk, I hope, is a bit of reasoning, and arguably a bit of good reasoning, but you cannot guarantee that from me. I'm a humble philosopher who wears silly bow ties to try to get the sympathy vote from you. But it's meant to be showing that, indeed, reasoning isn't all it's cut out to be. At times, you should act out of fellow feeling. The great Wittgenstein. I think Wittgenstein was arguably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century. So I'm always inclined not just to say Wittgenstein, but to say, Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein said the difficulty here is to stop. He was talking about philosophical reasoning, but I think it applies to these issues I've been mentioning about morality, about consumer choice, and so forth. The difficulty is indeed knowing when to stop. That also covers a much wider area when we think about explanations. Many people are concerned about explaining the existence of the Earth, and they may think we must go a bit further, and so they start explaining it in terms of the existence of the galaxies, or maybe big bangs and so on, and then they stop there. Other people think we must go further still, and so then they start invoking God, or gods in some way, and then they stop there. I'm passing no judgment about where you should stop, but once again, we are seeing how the issue is somewhere we need to learn to stop. Seeking for explanations, we need to learn to stop reasoning. And I know one way of doing that is perhaps to drink too much red wine, but I think it'll be much better to stop reasoning when you realize you should be acting out of fellow feeling on many occasions. And so, let's remember as Buridan's ass, when you're inclined to get trapped into lots of reasoning, just remember what happened to the ass.
When you just can't decide, let the ass be your guide. Just recall, after all, that ass nearly died. Stupid ass. What an ass.
And that, of course, is the nubile young lady who I did manage to save from drowning. It's a pity about my mother, but there you are. And so, as I say, the difficulty here is to learn how to stop. Remember the ass. Thank you.